the beginning of some pictures that we wanted to send to you showing our past year in Copenhagen. This is Dean in front of our Christmas tree. This is a picture of Dean with his new toys after we've opened up some of the packages. We can see the scooter from Aunt Edith and his rubber deer that made him very happy. Proof positive. Here is our homemade Swedish sausage and bread. The boys are playing with the new wooden Swedish train set from Grandma and Grandpa. Here we are opening up the packages. Getting together with friends help make Christmas a less lonely time for us. From right to left, you can see Al, myself, Jeff and Dee Mitchell, Pastor and Doris Hanson, Dorothy and Bob Harum. This is Dee Mitchell keeping the offspring occupied during part of the evening. Keith, can you tell us who some of those children are?
Well, for the first, there is Mrs. Mitchell, and then there's Mary Hart, and the oldest handsome girl, Karen, and Margie Mitchell, and in back of the boy there is Michael Harum, and there's Billy, he's in back of him. I don't know who that
That's
is.
you behind everybody.
Me behind
Yeah.
that. And there's Margie and Dean
And
and
David.
and
This must be Philip Mitchell
Philip Mitchell, yeah.
and Beth Hansen in the yellow sweater. In Denmark, they have 2 Christmas days. So the second day, we started out on a trip to Newland. It was snowing when we left, but we continued anyway, and we got to Horsens, near Horsens, where we visited Miles Rowe's relatives.
This place was also very interesting because they had a vase that some fishermen had fished out in the little ocean there. In the old days, there had been a Stone Age or Bronze Age camp there, and they also gave me a clam opener and a stone axe from that time.
Heading north, we came to Raybuild, where you see the Lincoln log cabin in the valley. What happens at Raybuild in the summertime, Keith?
The Americans and the Danes get together and celebrate the 4th of July.
This is a Viking stone that is on a high hill overlooking the log cabin at Raybuild. It really links the past of the 2 countries, America and Denmark. North again to Binslip, where we visited Jane Behrens and her family. Jane was the Danish girl who worked for us last year. Keith and Dean, what did we do in Binslip that night?
Danced around the Christmas tree and sung Danish Christmas carols.
And how is the Christmas tree lit? They're candles, aren't they?
Candles!
Yes, and what happened that night? One of the candles caught the tree on fire, didn't it?
Yeah, one of the candles caught the tree on fire.
This is the beach of northern Jutland, almost up to Skagen, which is the northernmost tip. Keith was very anxious to search for amber on this beach, but the snow and the wind hindered him. So we ended up going to a jewelry shop in a nearby fishing village. Back home again in January. Dean, who's the little girl with you?
Carol and Dean.
Carol and Dean, and they're out playing in the snow, aren't they? We had a great deal of snow last year. Sun did shine occasionally. Here are the boys with Johnny out front, taking him for a walk. Here are the children in the backyard, again in the snow. That's Janet and Carol Snow. January 15th. What happened on this day, Keith?
Well, it was my birthday, and we first went ice skating, and then we came home, ate, we had hamburgers and malted milks and all the luxuries of home, and then we opened the presents, showed pictures, and then, of course, we got this we got a tape recording, and...
Did you have a good time?
Yes.
Okay. The coldest winter in 30 years made it very difficult for the fairies. Here you see one plowing through the ice. Most of the waterways, in fact, all of the waterways, and where they all the waterways around Denmark were frozen up last winter. These ferries carry cars also, so they're quite large. He uses these to travel when he goes to Fune or Jutland. So when the ice froze over like that, it was very difficult for people to travel back and forth. In fact, these same ferries go to Sweden. And one year back in history, the Swedish soldiers crossed over this ice to invade Denmark. February was the month for the American Men's Club birthday event. It was on Washington's birthday, in fact. Here we are, dressed up for the party. Irene will recognize her cape and the bag Myrtle had given me for Christmas, and Edith had sent the dress over. Also in February was a very important day. Dean, that was your birthday, wasn't it? Can you tell us what kind of a cake you had?
Chocolate cake, and some love on the cake, and some flakes and apples on the cake.
Also on the cake too, wasn't it? And you had a girlfriend over for dinner that night, didn't you?
And that's Dean and Carol.
Dean and Carol again. Yes, sirree. Where's Carol now, Dean? She's in America, isn't she?
She's in America.
Here they are opening up the packages together, of course. Spring brought the most wonderful gift of all. Here we see Grandma and Grandpa arriving in Copenhagen. The boys had a flower gift for each of them. The blossoming fruit trees make Denmark seem like a fairyland in the spring. Here is an example of one of them. Copenhagen from the air. Dad, who recognized the Round Tower, Christiansborg Castle, and other famous buildings that we toured, we decided to see Copenhagen as well as we could in the early spring before they started out on their other trips. Keith and Grandpa enjoyed the National Museum. Here is a map that they saw there of the Viking explorations. There are many other very, very interesting things in this museum. This is Mother and Dad in Rosenborg Castle. We visited it one Sunday afternoon as it's located right across the street from our church. This was the summer home at one time of a very famous king, Christian IV. Al had just given me a new camera, so I didn't let enough light in on these pictures. I'm sorry that they aren't as good as they should be, but Grandma and Grandpa did show up real well. And pictures 25, 26, 27, you will see some of the gold, silver, and porcelain that is on display in this castle. The beautiful inlaid chest at Rosenborg. This is the throne room of Christian IV, with the gold lion guarding it. Al said it was silver, so I'll stand corrected. This castle has more silver than any other castle in Northern Europe. French held the record at one time. They had to melt down a great deal of their silver during the war. It is getting dusk in this picture, but I think you can make out Grandpa and the boys manning the guns at Kronborg Castle, about which Shakespeare wrote the play Hamlet. This castle is more of a military type castle and was used to guard the entrance to the Olsons in the old days when Denmark and Sweden were feuding. Here we still are at Kronborg Castle, where you see Grandma and Grandpa on the lookout post with Sweden across the Olsons. This is the beach in front of Kronborg that is used a great deal now for fishing. Of course, Keith had to spend some time looking for amber also. In the background, you can see the ferries that go back and forth to Sweden about every 20 minutes. We couldn't resist a picture of Dean with the guards in front of the castle at Kronborg. This is the boys in the famous botanical gardens in the heart of Copenhagen. Of course, we had to take Mother and Dad to Tivoli. So Dean ends up with a ride on the merry-go-round. here he is on Porky Pig. Going to the beach was another interesting experience for Grandma and Grandpa. The Danish children under 5 do not wear any bathing trunks, as you can plainly see. This beach is very close to our home in Charlottenlund. All the bicycles at the beach were fascinating to Grandma, so we snapped this picture so that you could see them too. We wonder how they can all be identified. Here is our charming little chimney sweep who comes in the spring and the fall. They come on their bicycles all dressed alike. One of Mother's and my favorite activities when she was here was going junking. This is one of the purchases that we made. It is silver and is considered an antique by a Danish friend who visited us. And for this we paid just 30 kroner, which is about $4.50.
One of the places we enjoyed taking our visitors to Copenhagen is the Open Air Museum, which is in Lyngby, about 5 miles from our house. This is a gathering place for several old buildings taken from various parts of Denmark, representing the areas that they're taken from and periods in the history of Denmark. In this picture we have an old farm building taken from the south part of Jutland. It has the influence of Holland architecture, built in the 1600s at the time that farming was quite a lucrative business, and the farmers were pretty wealthy people. To the right is the dwelling of the owner, and to the left, the large section is the barn. It was typical through Northern Europe and much of England in the 1600s. Grandma thought that the design of the brick in this particular building was interesting. This was an old German farm building moved from the Schleswig-Holstein area. This is an old building taken from the northwest coast of Jutland. Very, very poor structure made of clay brick, which was baked out under the sun, not in a kiln. This is the central heating system for most of the houses, the typical central heating system of the day.
This house was particularly interesting for us because it came from southern Sweden, the area that was Danish at one time, and on a log in the rear was carved the name Nord. Notice the roof made out of turf with grass and flowers growing from it, which is really very typical of Norway rather than Sweden. Also, there's also a window in the roof to the left of the fireplace. Here you see Grandpa and the boys examining the seaweed roof from a fisherman's house of Jutland. The roof comes almost to the ground. It was very interesting. Al said it was probably used more for insulation than as a roof. It's another view of the same house. Farther away from the same house, you get another view of it with a very old windmill in the back. Al experimented with taking pictures of some maps. And here you see a map of Mother and Dad's travels to England, Norway, Germany, Sweden, and through Denmark. This is a closer view of our trip to Germany and up through Jutland and across fields that we will be discussing in just a few moments. To the right, we were going south. Germany. This is the city of Lübeck. And in this picture, you see the Roman Gate, which was a very famous landmark for that area. This is a huge church in Lübeck that was bombed on Easter Sunday during the war. The bells in the tower fell to the cement during this bombing, but they were left where they fell as a memorial or a remembrance of the war. This is an aerial view of this gate in Lübeck. This is a picture taken from a tower that we went up to see the old city of Lübeck from the air.
During the Middle Ages, a number of the trading centers of Northern Europe, Scandinavia and Germany, were tied together in the Hanseatic League. Lübeck was one of the cities, and in Lübeck, these buildings were used as the salt cellars or the salt warehouses during that time.
We drove north again to Germany, and this was a typical German farmhouse, only it's a very nice farmhouse, nicer than the average. This is a rural farmhouse in Germany, which is rather typical of the German countryside. It is more unkempt in appearance than Denmark, as far as we were concerned. An interesting sight for us was seeing the Kiel Canal, and this is a ship going up the canal. In the city of Kiel, there was still a great deal of bomb damage. Here you could see some huge pieces of concrete that are still left as they were during the war after bombing. In northern Germany, we saw a place where they were harvesting straw for use in making roofs and also for making the darling little straw ornaments that they use at Christmas time. Here we see a man making a straw roof. Al says I've got to say some more about that so he can tell you about it.
Making straw roofs is almost a lost art anymore in Denmark. Sometimes when you go to a cemetery, you'll see a marker with the name of a man, and afterwards you'll find the title Tekamen, because most all of the old Tekamen, or the people who put on straw roofs, are dead. However, if you do find one, you can be sure that he will know all of the gossip of the little rural town that he lives in, because he'll be one of the oldest inhabitants, and it seems as if the Tekamen always know the gossip of the town. During medieval times, the south of Jutland, which was Schleswig, was ruled by German princes who were loyal to the Danish crown. This is the home of the Duke of Schleswig in southern Jutland.
Western Jutland is a very windy area, as you can see. The wind has blown these trees over on their sides. This is a picture of Rebild in the summertime. We showed it to you before in the winter with the snow. It is a very lovely place. And Mother and Dad and the rest of us spent one night in an old hotel in Ribe, which is in southern Jutland. Notice the canopy bed. This hotel was built in about 1500. The floors slanted, and there was straw coming out of the walls. Grandma enjoyed all the old antiques. The whole town was excited the day we were there over the arrival of the storks. Here you see two of them in their nest. The cathedral in Ribe is very beautiful and famous. Here is the organ. Painted frescoes on the wall were very beautiful and quite old. The famous Danish beach, where tourists, especially from Germany, come up to spend the summer. This is on Jutland. From Ribe, we went north to Esbjerg to show Mother and Dad the fishing industry there. From here also the ferries leave for England. The Yellingstone. It was a real thrill for all of us to see the original stone on which the Viking king Harald Bluetooth proclaimed Scandinavia a Christian land. The church by the stone retains the original altar of Christian worship in Scandinavia. Dates from the year 940, Al says. From Jutland, we traveled across quite a long bridge to get to the island of Fune. This is a typical farming landscape on Fune, with the windmill and the red cows. Outside of Odense is a museum similar to the Freelance Museum outside of Copenhagen, with the farmhouses from the island. This is a typical Fune farmhouse, many of which are built around a square. Typical costumes on the island of Fune. In southern Fune, we stopped to have a quick bite of lunch along the way. As you see, it is early spring as the leaves are not out yet. Odense means H.C. Andersen's home to the world. This is a picture of the famous author reading one of his stories to a sick child. Here we see Mother and Dad and Keith and Dean in front of the home where H.C. Andersen was born and lived as a child. It is very small and the street is very narrow. This is the interior of the house in which he lived. This picture shows the office furniture of Hans Christian Andersen, as in the days that he was writing his famous stories, The Ugly Duckling and so on. This is distribution the hard way. we thought you might be interested in seeing an international harvester tractor being transported from southern Fune to one of the small islands south of that island. It is taken across on these very small fishing boats. From Fune, we cross over the Storabelt back to our home island of Sjælland. As we were driving from the ferry towards dusk, we noticed a sign saying Trelleborg, and it rang a bell with Al and I as being something connected with the Vikings. So we decided to pursue it further and drove into this farmyard. Here we saw the Viking military encampment. This is an outline of one of their houses. Foundations are the original, and you can see the rocks in the middle where they had their fire. This is a replica of one of the buildings, and this is exactly what we saw as we drove into the farmyard. Rather eerie feeling at that time of night. This is a model of the entire encampment. It was located very close to a fjord where they could get in and out more easily. It housed about 1,100 men at the time. Al says there's no written history of it, and they can determine the facts that they have just from the remains of the camp. Another long weekend gave us a chance to spend 4 days in Sweden. Here we're saying goodbye to Denmark. Grandma and Grandpa and the boys and I on board the ferry crossing the Olsons. It takes about 20 minutes to get from Helsingborg to Helsingør. The first sight of Swedish architecture at Helsingborg, I believe, was quite a thrill to Grandma and Grandpa. This is rather typical of the farming in this area of Sweden. This is the Skåne area. There are lots of rocks in the farming country here. Here you can see the rocks lying in the soil. The farm buildings we thought were very similar to the buildings in Minnesota. The rocks are so plentiful that they make fences from them, and one drives for miles and sees just square areas of fences with these red and white farm buildings, which again looked very much like Minnesota and Wisconsin to us. This is a double-towered church in Skåne. We had lunch in a park very near to this. Grandma and Grandpa will remember, I'm sure. Between Vaxu and Kalmar are some 30 glassworks of different sizes, producing art of distinguished design, such as Costa, Orifors, and so on, plus those making utility glassware. It is truly fascinating to watch these glass blowers at work. We stopped in the museum at Vaxu first, and here we see Keith in front of a mural showing how glass is made. This picture shows Mother and Dad in the Costa glass factory. We were all surprised at how primitive the glass making is done. The same methods that were used hundreds of years ago are still being done today, and men walk back and forth carrying this molten glass from one area to another. Actually, it is very dangerous. Here you see a glass blower at work. From the glass factory area, we drove across Sweden to Kalmar. This is the hotel where we spent our first night. Kalmar is very important in the history of Sweden. It was here that in 1397 a treaty was concluded, which for 1 century, only such period in history, united the 3 Scandinavian countries into one kingdom. This is a picture of the old city wall with its gate that protected Kalmar from invaders in the old days. I think you can see Grandpa examining one of the stones there in the entryway. In this picture, we see the moat around the city wall. These were very important in the old days as a protection from invaders. In the courtyard of Kalmar Castle, I thought you would be interested in knowing that each year Swedish American Day is celebrated on the second Sunday in August every year. We weren't able to get Mother and Dad up to the town of Arvika from where their grandparents immigrated. But we drove into a town in central Sweden that was identical in appearance to Arvika, and this is a picture of the houses and the hilly streets. In this very same town, we read in the literature of this old church that was interesting to see. So we came to it and walked in. Much to our amazement, we found the church filled with people and the confirmation service was being held. There was not a car in sight, as everyone evidently walks to church. This is the city square in Karlskrona, Sweden. This was filled with people selling vegetables and fruits and flowers when we arrived, but at 2 o'clock everything was cleared. We drove farther south to the Baltic coast on the southern coast of Sweden, where we saw this royal Bronze Age tomb. The Bronze Age dates from about 1500 to 500 BC. This was at Kivik. Here you see Mother Dean entering the Bronze Age tomb, which was really a huge mound of rock. It has been reconstructed, and the original site was just a mound of rock. Inside the burial chamber, we found engraved tombstones outlining the grave of a prehistoric monarch. Another reason we enjoyed our visit to Kivik so much was that near this royal tomb was a small, quaint Swedish inn serving homemade Swedish coffee bread, which we of course enjoyed a great deal. It just happened that the day we visited this Swedish inn was Mother's Day, so Dean and Keith were busily gathering some of the early spring flowers to bring us each a bouquet. Here are the boys with an interesting tree by the Kivik tomb. Keith could imagine all sorts of activity during the Bronze Age in that tree, I'm sure. A short distance from the tomb, we found this Viking burial place that had a sacrificial stone in the center. You can see Keith standing near the stone. Still farther to the south, at the very tip of Sweden, we found the largest Viking burial ship grave that we had ever seen. This is the sight we saw as we came to the top of the hill. Off in the distance you see the Baltic Ocean on three sides. This was a huge grave. Here you see Dean on top of one of the rocks, showing the comparative size. Another interesting sight for us in our drive through southern Sweden was this Swedish medieval manor house called Glimminghus. The walls are about 4 feet thick, a real fortress with a moat around it on all sides. In Lund, Sweden, we saw a beautiful cathedral which dates from the 12th century. This is the best example of Romanesque architecture in all of Scandinavia. A tired traveler. Al took a trip to Paris, where he is pictured with some of his friends.
This summer I took a trip to Paris for 1 week to attend a dealer development meeting, and we did have a little time to look at Paris. This picture was taken on the top of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And near the Arc de Triomphe is the famous Eiffel Tower, which nobody seems to know the reason for. There's even been a good deal of discussion lately of taking this tower down. This is the Arc de Triomphe built by Napoleon for the triumphant re-entry of his troops into Paris after they'd been away at the fronts. There is a museum in the structure, and there's constantly a light burning at the foot of the arch in memory of soldiers who died in the wars of France. This is the Opera House in Paris, a very famous structure. At the time that I was there, the Swedish king and his queen were visiting Paris, and I just happened to be walking by here when the two of them came out with de Gaulle. This is the Cathedral of Notre Dame, an extremely intricate structure on an island in the Seine River. This is a picture that I took from one of the bridges over the Seine of a group of people sitting down by the river playing cards. There are always a large number of people wandering around or sitting along the sidewalk on sidewalk cafes. but they just don't seem to have enough ambition to clean up their city. This is the Madeleine Church in the center of Paris, built by Napoleon also. It has no windows. Typical street scene in Paris with the sidewalk cafes. The structure that you see to the right is one of their open-air toilets. That little visit to Paris, I had seen all that I'd wanted to see, and I was very, very happy to get back to Copenhagen. It really seemed like home.
It is June 23rd, Grandma's birthday. On our return home, Janet and Carol Snow were anxiously waiting to give her a bouquet of flowers. Here you see us having the birthday dinner. We had been gone sightseeing most of the day, so we weren't able to have as nice a dinner as I would have liked to have had for Grandma. On our vacation this year, we drove to Sweden to catch a ferry to the Danish island of Bornholm, where we camped. This is a typical European campsite, not ours, however, but we did feel like tramps, as the Danish campers do not rough it. Some even had cupboards for their dishes. This is the beach near our camp where the boys played in the sand. Notice Keith's wooden shoes that are wonderful for camping. In the center of the island, we felt like we were in northern Minnesota, with a lovely lake surrounded by rocks and trees. Our favorite spot on Bornholm was this little town of Goodhjem. This is a painter's paradise. Here we see the boys at Goodhjem with the famous fish house in the background, the one with the double chimney. Smoked herring is Goodhjem's specialty for more than 125 years. Here we see Dean with his wooden shoes in front of one of the many fishing boats that are used to catch the fish that are smoked on the island. Here we see the typical fishermen's houses in Goodhjem with the nets drying out and back. Here we see the granite that is so characteristic of Bornholm.
Bornholm is made of a granite outcropping. It is actually a part of the same land mass as the southern part of Sweden. The entire north part of Bornholm is a large lump of granite. The south side of Bornholm is sand.
In the northern part of the island is found the ruins of an old fortress called Hammerhus. It is the largest ruin in northern Europe. For about 500 years, the island was governed here by the successive masters of the island. This is a view from the castle to the bridge over the moat. The castle is on a very high cliff. From the front of the castle, one looks out to sea, but directly below is an interesting lion's head formation in the rock. Most famous of all tourist attractions on Bornholm are the 4 round churches. The most imposing of all is this one at Oosterlars, which was built in the 12th century. It formed a safe refuge from the attacks of buccaneers in the good old days. The highlight of this vacation for the boys was a charming park and an old Danish farm. Rowing a boat was a new experience for Keith. Here we see Keith riding over the water that we had just rowed the boat through. The old-fashioned go-kart was a lot of fun for the boys, too. The wooden roller coaster was a lot of fun for Dean. It's surprising how these simple toys were made into such attractive forms of entertainment for the children. Bornholm is famous for its pottery. Here we are visiting the Suholm factory. This is our guide, and we're standing in front of the unglazed figurines. Dean with the lovely vases and lamps in the Suholm display room. On one beautiful day, we ferried to the island of Christiansø, which is the most easterly of all Denmark's islands. We are leaving the port of Goodhjem at this point. We had our lunch of smørbrød on the island at the only cafe. Notice the cigar that the lady in the background is smoking. After lunch, we walked around the island. We had asked to rent bicycles, but they snickered, and we soon realized why, as there were no roads. In 1684, this island was fortified as a powerful naval fortress, but it was never used as such. Here the boys are on one of the cannons. In the center of the island is the ruin of this old fortress. This is the view out to the harbor where our ferry is docked. These are the houses on Christiansø with the small gardens in the rear. The island has its own church, doctor, and post office, but there are no roads, telephone, or television. Back to Copenhagen. Outside the house, Benny, the Chilean boy, took this picture. Grandparents off to America. Our loss is your gain. Two other interesting house guests, a boy from Northern Ireland and James Elliott from St. Paul. During August, Keith spent a week at a Danish scout camp. Another milestone in August was Dean's first day at school. September found us fishing for red spetta and torsk just south of Kronborg Castle. All in all, it has been a wonderful year.